Hello everyone, and today we are going to be talking about thinking and intelligence. Now, what questions we're going to explore this week are what is intelligence? I think we have a lot of ideas about what intelligence is. Most likely we relate this to formal education and the knowledge of random facts or semantic memories, as you'll see. But it's a lot more than that, and it's kind of hard to pin down, so it's something that's still heavily researched. But we'll give you kind of a rudimentary definition to work with. How do we develop concepts of things we've never experienced? What does an IQ test measure? Just because people talk about that a lot in terms of intelligence. Are street smarts a valid form of intelligence? How do we problem solve? What is creativity? And how do we develop language? I know there's a lot in this section, so I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible. So let's get started with the basics. What is cognition? So we're going to describe it, distinguish between concepts and prototypes, and explain the difference between natural and artificial concepts. I know again that these topics are larger. It seems like we have more topics to cover, but they're very succinct in this section. So try not to fret too much because I know we had a lot of information to process with the memory unit. So I tried to keep this one smaller. So with cognition defined, cognition simply put, if we're going to use general terms, is thinking. So it's how we perceive events. Now, perception is how we take in events and how we process them individually. So think of it this way. We talked about like our senses a little bit and how our brain processes information and input. So it's going to be similar processes for how that information, that sensory input, is put into our brains. Like how I smell and how you smell are going to be similar processes, but our perceptions are going to be different. This is how we experience those sensations. So I hate the smell of popcorn, for example. So if I walk into a movie theater and have that sensation of the smell of popcorn, my perception is going to be grossed out, thinking about the job I had in a popcorn truck as a teenager, etc. Whereas maybe you love the smell of popcorn. So if you have the sensation of the smell of popcorn, your perception may be happy, or think of movies, or I don't know, think of how expensive popcorn is when you go to the movies. We're also going to talk about, I just wanted to clarify that differentiation for you. But we're also going to talk about knowledge, problem solving, how we approach problems and the different solutions we use or how we come up with those solutions, judgment, language, and memory. So we talked about memory previously, so I won't try to harp on that too much. But those memories and those structures kind of help us informing our language as well as they are informed by our language. So the words we use are determined by our knowledge of words, and our knowledge of words are going to be shaped by the words themselves. And we'll get into that more. I know it sounds a little convoluted right now, but I'll try to clarify. And so cognitive psychologists study how we integrate, organize, and utilize our conscious cognitive experiences. So how do we process maybe a scary movie? We talked about learning and classical conditioning. Well, there are certain parts in scary movies where you hear scary music. Well, how did we come to know that that music is scary? Right? These are all things we can kind of think about. How do we come to learn to associate those things? How does it inform the information that we're trying to determine? Once I hear that scary music, what am I thinking is going to happen in the music? In the movie, maybe something's going to pop out. Right? These are all things that I've learned through experiences. And I know it seems silly to use movies as an example, but this can go from something seemingly minute as learning and associations to larger concepts such as how we view other people and other groups, how we develop stereotypes, right? How those stereotypes affect our thinking about groups of people. We're going to talk about that. So, cognition is an essential feature of human consciousness. From what we know and have studied about animals so far, human animals, we can tell that there is a conscious component. Now, of course, there is an extensive amount of research that goes into non-human animals, but we're going to focus on human consciousness. So cognitive psychology is just defined the field of psychology dedicated to examining how people think. So we're going to look at the how and why we think the way we do concerning our thinking. Thinking about our thinking is just simply called metacognition. We're reflecting on why did I think about that when I was presented with this information. It's kind of catching yourself and calling yourself out on those little details. Why did I think to cross the street when I saw that little sign change, the little person change? I know these are random examples, but you think consistently. And sometimes we do it unrestricted. We don't often question why we think. So that's what we're trying to do in this question, in this section, is to think about our thinking. We're also going to look at emotions, creativity, language, problem solving, are all going to be affected by how we think about things. Excuse me. We're also going to measure, cognitive psychology is also going to look at different types of intelligence and how we organize thoughts and information into meaningful categories. So basically, this is an illustration of what I was saying in terms of perceptions. So we gather information and sensory input. And a lot of times that sensory information is going to conjoin with emotions and memories. They're going to be tied with emotions and experiences. And those are going to affect the thoughts we have about a certain scenario. So let's say you were a little kid and you were at a truck show or something, I don't know. You saw this giant truck. You took in how red it was, how big it was, right? And you were there with your dad or your mom and they took you to see this certain truck and it was just the happiest time you can remember from your childhood. Well, see, you've taken that sensory information of that truck and you've tied it in with those emotions. You're not only thinking about the sensory experience of visually seeing the truck or experiencing it in person, but you're also thinking about the good times you had with a parental figure. These factors are going to affect the thoughts you have about certain things. So maybe when you reflect on big, giant red trucks, you think of that wonderful memory you have with your childhood and your parent. That is a lot of, classical conditioning, and it's a lot of what we're going to look at with cognitive psychology. So we're building on that learning unit. And now these, I know this seems like overly simplified, but these processes can also affect they are kind of everyday experiences, unfortunately, but these are going to affect different things such as how you perceive other groups of people. So maybe you have certain ideas about different groups of people. Maybe you have some implicit biases you haven't addressed yet. You are going to have emotions and memories tied with that information, and it's going to affect how you think about those people. And I'm not going to touch too much about that right now because we're going to investigate it further in the social psychology chapter, but just think about the vastly different scenarios in which this illustration applies. So the idea of concepts and prototypes, when we break it down, concepts are simply going to be categories or groups of linguistic information, images, ideas, or memories. So these are going to be those big ideas. When I say scaffolding and assimilation and accommodation, these are different methods through which we gather our information. So say you have a concept of a dog. I think I talked about this in our memory unit. But let's say you have the concept of a dog. You have all these ideas associated with that dog. When we gather new information, when we're scaffolding that information, think of like a scaffold for when they're constructing a new building. Okay? You always see construction equipment. Well, the point of what they're doing is they're using that scaffold to help them build the new building, right? Maybe you see some people laying bricks and standing on the scaffold while they're building a new structure. I hope that image is clear. Think of that new concept that we're building as the building in progress. And think of the scaffold as the techniques you use to build that building, right? So you're going to assimilate information and accommodate information depending on how it fits with your current concept. So if something's assimilated, for example, you're kind of bringing it into your existing idea. You're saying, okay, I understand that a dog has 4 legs, but I just saw a video of this dog with 3 legs. So sometimes dogs can have 3 legs. Yes, sometimes dogs can have 3 legs. That's a type of assimilation, very basic example. Whereas accommodation might be an example of a small child understanding that a dog has 4 legs and seeing a goat, which also has 4 legs. Well, the child's going to make that differentiation that, oh, well, not just dogs have 4 legs and are fuzzy. Also, we have this idea of goats. So we're going to accommodate or build a new building for that concept of a goat. I really hope I didn't confuse you all with this example, but just know that these concepts, they're like maps in our brain for how we link different ideas and descriptions of ideas. And the prototype, simply put, is the best example for that concept. So if you have a concept of a dog, what's the best example you have of a dog? Probably your own dog if you have one. Or think of when you hear the term civil disobedience. Some people think Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That's a prototype of the idea of civil disobedience, of that concept. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, because the last thing I want to do is confuse you further. Natural and artificial concepts. Natural, just think they happen. What do you think of when you hear something's natural? You think it just kind of occurs, right? Well, think of it that way. It's a first-hand experience with different observations. So this is the idea that if you grew up in the Midwest where it snowed all the time, you know what snow is through your personal experience. But someone in Hawaii may not have that direct experience with snow, but they have an indirect idea. Maybe they saw a Christmas movie one time, right? So these are your personal experiences and observations. So they can be direct or indirect. That should say or, not of, excuse me. I'll fix it on your PowerPoint. So if you have direct experience with snow, you've played in it, you've sled, you've done all these things. If you have indirect experience, you've saw a Christmas movie one time where it was snowing and it was just so magical and you loved it. Whatever. You get the picture. Artificial concepts are going to be concepts defined through a specific set of characteristics. Honestly, the best example for artificial concepts are shapes and in geometry, because the only way these different things exist is through the set of characteristics through which we define them. So a triangle. Yeah, different things in life are shaped as a triangle, but a triangle in and of itself only exists as a set of characteristics. And what are those? It has 3 sides, 3 angles. The interior angles equal 180 degrees, I'm pretty sure. I'm not a mathematician, I'm a psych person. But anyway, you get the point. Crucial for engaging in complex thought. And that's the idea behind this section, is we really want to focus on how we think, how we cognate, because it's a question of if our thoughts affect how we perceive information, or if our perceptions of information affect our thoughts. And it kind of works both ways. Now, schemata, we kind of touched on this earlier, is a mental construct consisting of a cluster or collection of related concepts. So think of this as like kind of like a bookcase that you've built up with all this information. You've collected all these books on a certain topic. That's kind of the idea of a schemata. That one bookcase, let's say you have a bookcase about nursing, because you're a nursing student. You have all different books of nursing and all these different ideas that relate to nursing. So you're trying to organize information so your brain can work efficiently and fill in gaps of information. Because all of the books and information you've collected thus far is trying to understand more and more about that concept. So we have schemas that are role schemas and event schemas. So role schemas are going to deal with like people's roles in society. So we're making assumptions about how individuals will behave in their roles. So if I say I'm a mom, what are you going to think about my role? right? You may think, oh, well, she's probably loving, she's probably plays a lot of games, um, she's very caring. What do you think about a firefighter? Maybe you think about someone's sex or gender. Maybe you think about a hero, right? These are the types of ideas for a role schema. They help give us a little shortcut. Because if you were in trouble and running down the street and there was a fire, who would you call? Who would you look for? A firefighter or maybe an EMT, because you know their schema and what they're supposed to do in that role. And I say supposed to with air quotes, right? And an event schema is just a set of behaviors that's like a routine. So this can be something as your shower routine, and it's very difficult to break, like checking your phone. You have an event schema. Let's say I can guarantee that a majority of you, when you shower, you have a certain kind of script you follow. Like, okay, I'm gonna wash my hair with shampoo, then I'm gonna wash my face with my face wash, then I'm gonna put my conditioner in, then I'm gonna wash my body, then I'm gonna rinse my conditioner out, and then I'm gonna put on a face mask when I get out. Right? Some variation of that sort. That is a cognitive script. And so that's a routine. And routines can benefit us in some sense because they give us those shortcuts so we don't have to use our brain as much. But because we're not using our brain as much, we can kind of fall prey to them. It's kind of like that idea of low consciousness. We're engaging in things and not questioning them. Like when you see a video online or Facebook, right? We question, is that real? What source is it coming from? Is that graph accurate? Sometimes people don't exercise those cognitive skills. And so a lot of what we're talking about here depends on how much cognitive effort you put forth. And I'm going to stop this video here and stay tuned for part 2.